Welcome to the Bath Royal Literary and Scientific Institution virtual walk on Routeways between Bristol and Bath and the innovators who created them. The talk is based on the Royal Geographical Society's Discovering Britain walk called Connecting Cities. It's a walk through the Somerset village of Saltford, where I've lived for the last 40 years. My name is Dick Bateman and I'm Geography and Adventure Convener at BRLSI. I created this walk for Discovering Britain in 2011, and you can find it on the Royal Geographical Society website. So this is where the walk starts and where you'd park your car if you come by car, and if you come by bus you would get off at any of the stops along the main Bath Road and ask any of the friendly locals and they'll direct you to the Shallows car park. And here we are again at the Shallows car park, but this time on the Ordnance Survey map. Watch for the little pulsing arrow to take us south. There he goes, so down south to the brass mill, south east towards the marina, then underneath the Great Western Railway line to the A4 road, northwest up the A4 and turn right and across a footbridge over the Great Western Railway line, north on the top of the Shallows. Then we descend into the Shallows again and along a field to the Midland Bridge, where we cross the river and walk on to one of the signposts of the Cycleway trail, retrace our steps to the Bird in Hand car park and up past the Bird in Hand, and then back down south to the Shallows car park again. A very nice little walk. And here are the 7 transport innovators: John Hore and John Padmore for the Kennett and Avon Canal, John Loudon Macadam and his macadamisation of the Bristol Bath Turnpike, Isambard Kingdom Brunel and the Great Western Railway, which is still the main Bristol to London railway line, William Eckersley and John Bayliss for the Midland Railway line, which then became the LMS Somerset and Dorset line, known to the locals as the Slow and Dirty. And in place number 7, but not least in my book, John Grimshaw and his Cycle Bag and Sustrans Cycleway network, which is extended right across Britain from Saltford. And here they are, shown on this fine aerial photograph by Jamie Bolton from 2018. The Kennett and Avon Canal, if you follow the arrow, you can see where the weir was put across the river and a lock through. This isn't the first one on the River Avon, but it's shown very clearly here. So the water behind it, upstream, wouldn't be flowing as fast. It would be slightly dammed back, and it would be navigable for canal barges, which could go through the lock. In 1816, about 100 years later, this is where John Macadam put his macadamisation into practice, and Isambard Kingdom Brunel only 21 years later put his Great Western Railway on an embankment from Bath and then a cutting through Saltford. William Eckersley and John Bayliss designed and built the Midland Railway in 1869. Dr. Beeching closed it in 1969 and John Grimshaw opened it up starting in 1981. Look how many trees have grown up. There weren't any trees at all when it was a railway. And John Grimshaw opened the track from Bristol to Bath in 1983. Here we are again at the Shallows car park, but this photograph is just so you can see Bert in the foreground and Dolly on the far right, two Welsh Terriers who walked with me on many a lovely walk. So this is Saltford looking down. The car park's just to the left and looking down to the River Avon and across. This is where the cycleway now goes. Loads of trees mark its route, which wasn't always the case, as we'll see. And we'll look up to the southern or western flank of the Cotswolds. So Saltford, why Salt Ford? Well, ford, dead easy, because it's a river where you can ford across, and this is called the Shallows. There's a clue in there. You could ford across at low tide, certainly when it was tidal. And when it was tidal, the water would have been salt water, as opposed to the village the other side of Bath, Freshford, where the water was fresh. So that's a good clue for the name. But in the Domesday Book, it wasn't called Saltford, it was called Sanford. And people have wondered whether that was maybe sand, because here at low tide you've got big patches of sand. And some people have even said there are loads of willow trees. These cottages are called Willow Cottage. Sal is the Anglo-Saxon name for willow. Perhaps Salford in the olden days. And there are some place names very early on, 12th, 13th century, which show it as Salford. We're going to look at the river first in terms of innovation. And this is a wonderful painting which was rescued by Saltford Environment Group, whose chair, Phil Harding, traced where the painting had gone. It used to hang up in the Jolly Sailor pub. And this, at the time of the painting, which was 1721, wasn't the pub at all. It was a miller's cottage. Here's the mill. There's the drying rooms. And it was for fulling cloth. The weir was put across, a lock was put through the weir, and here we can see a canal barge being pulled not by horses but by men. The landowners were so tight they wouldn't have their fields churned up by horses, not in 1720. But by 1740 the industrialists who put up the money for this, namely Ralph Allen, getting his stone into Bristol and across to London by means of the Kennett and Avon Canal barges, he wanted them pulled by the far more efficient horses than men. And so money changed hands and the landowners said, okay, you can have towpaths on our land. Things didn't always run smoothly, mind. In 1738, this lock was blown up. Nobody knows quite who, but the rumour was the culprits were widely thought to have been Somerset coal miners from the Radstock area, since a threatening letter promised more such attacks if transporting cheap coal by water didn't cease. The local miners didn't want cheap coal to be brought in from the thicker seams of the Midlands and South Wales to threaten their livelihood. And here, if we walk along from Saltford, from the Shallows car park, along to Saltford Brass Mill, here's another function of the river in those days. The river, look at the date, Saltford Brass Mill was created in 1723, just after the canalisation. The barges would bring brass up from the Abraham Darby's brass making plants in the centre of Bristol. using zinc from William Champion's zinc works. They would, in Warmley, they would create the brass along what is now the feeder in Bristol and ship it up to mills like this one all along the Avon Valley. This one would beat the brass into shapes, pots and pans, slave trade equipment, and brassware for the ships that plied the slave trade. And this mill worked right through the slave trade from 1723, and when the slave trade finished, furnished brass for many other purposes too, nautical purposes, the British Navy, domestic purposes and local industry, right up to 1928. The present chair of the brass mill is Dr. Tony Coverdale, whose day job used to be, I believe he's now retired, used to be health and safety advisor to our nuclear submarine fleet. And he is talking to a group from the Royal Geographical Society with the sound of the running water underneath his feet, which powered the mill. And here we're inside the mill, and Tony's extolling the virtues of the annealing furnace here, which is this is just lit up. It's not working at all at the moment. But the brassware would have splintered and broken unless it was heated up. And it was heated and then battered by great big beams like this one, which would have come down with points on and hit the brass, and skilled craftsmen would have manipulated the brass in so they could make virtually anything you wanted. And this was the brass mill in operation in 1905. Look at the pollution in the valley and the incessant sound day and night of the pounding of those great beams as the water tripped the hammers and they fell onto the brass. Our walk will come underneath here and up through along the Bath Road, back along that bridge and along the top of the shallows. When rail took over most of the transport from the canal barges from 1840 onwards, the process started. The river became more leisure orientated rather than trade orientated, and this is Saltford Regatta 1898 with local crews, and the aspiration was that this could become a West Country Henley-on-Thames. And there is still rowing here to this present day. Just up here there is a fancy Saltford Rowing Club with £1 million worth of investment. It's one of Britain's top rowing centres and produces Olympic athletes. People used to come in by the Midland Railway here and by the Great Western Railway and walk down to enjoy refreshment and no doubt the odd bet on who was going to win. And if you wanted to get from one side of the river to the other, you walked back down to Willow Cottages and rang the bell, and Hannah would bring you across. From 1868 she worked until 1908. And now another function of the river. This is up at the lock and weir we saw earlier. This is the marina just upstream from that lock, and my friend Darrell Pickup, whose family run the marina, say that 180 people live on narrow boats like these, either in the marina or along the side of the river in Saltford. And the towpath has become the River Avon Trail, with panels like this showing the history of the river and the people who lived along it. Now we'll move on to the road from the river. So 1789, an idyllic scene, but lurking down on the Bath Hill were highwaymen and other nasty events, as we'll see. Here's an account from the Bath Chronicle of 1791. Sorry, 1771, this one. Last week a journeyman carpenter was robbed of 13 shillings and some halfpence by a single mounted highwayman on the road from Saltford to Corston. He'd been at Bristol to seek for employ when he met with this villain, who prevailed the poor fellow to ride behind him to Bath. But when they came to the above-mentioned stretch, he turned his horse into the Corston lane, jumped off his horse, dragged the other man after him, and threatened to knock his brains out if he made any resistance. Took from him the above sum, being all the money he had, and immediately rode full speed back towards Bristol. But it wasn't just highwaymen. The Bath Hill, down from the Crown here, was notorious. It's a steep slope, and a chaise with two people in it, Mr. Thomas Lewis, a wheelwright, and Mr. Stone, a corn factor, a trader in grains, from Bath, were returning from Bristol in a single horse chaise, just like this one here. They attempted to pass a broad-wheeled wagon, like the one outside the Crown, on a narrow part of the road on the Bath Hill side of Saltford. The chaise hit a large stone and was thrown to the side. Both of the passengers were thrown under the wagon wheels, where they were instantly crushed to death. The article then made the case for road improvements in Saltford. It's much to be wished that this melancholy catastrophe may induce the Bristol Commissioners for that district to take immediate measures for widening the road, now so shamefully narrow, from the parish of Corston to the top of Saltford Hill, and if possible to avoid passing down that hill at all. Well, and this is the Bath Hill now, as we see it. We would have come across here on our walk. We would have walked up the Bath Hill, this steep slope, and we'll go through this little alleyway here, and eventually across the Great Western Railway, again on a bridge, as we saw earlier, and across the top of the Shallows. And as we go across the Great Western Railway, we must remember the unique Isambard Kingdom Brunel and his tall hat. You cannot mention the Industrial Revolution without him. In 1833, he was appointed to be Chief Engineer for the Great Western Railway. He had no previous knowledge of railways, but he designed and constructed tracks, buildings, locos, bridges, cuttings, embankments, and also selected and managed the staff himself. He started buying property in 1837 along the line of the track, and the first train carried Great Western Railway's directors and Brunel from London to Bristol in 4 hours on the 30th of June 1841. And this is when the first navigators began digging the railroad. 1836, June the 11th. This was graffiti on one of the big stones in Saltford brass mill when it was being investigated in 1980. What a find! Brunel was a good businessman. He'd originally wanted to buy Saltford Court, this place here, now called Saltford House, and knock it down for his railway to go over that land where the house presently stands. But the owner had been pre-warned and demanded an exorbitant price. Well, Brunel gave the matter some thought and changed his plans. He went next door, knocked on the door and said, "How much for your house?" £700 and some land. "I'll do it," he said. So he bought the house, now called Brunel's Tunnel House, then it was called the Villa, for that price. And he thought again, do I want to bring my railway up and over Saltford? Why not go under Tunnel House and save the gradient? It'll be a lot more cost in the short run, but it will pay for itself in 20 years. That's exactly what he did. And here we can see Saltford House, the court, now Saltford Court, and the Villa, now Brunel's Tunnel House. And here is the Great Western Railway. And here's the tunnel. The tunnel was created by William Ranger and his team. They went right through underneath here, and a very good bit of business. But here was a problem, and he didn't really spot it. Limestone and mudstone he was cutting through, and they're prone. Mudstone is clay, so when it rained, the clay held the water. The limestone tended to break off and slip down the slope, so we got landslips. Now, a friend of Isambard Kingdom Brunel's and his family was the pioneering lady engineer from Bristol, Sarah Guppy. And she became involved in the Great Western Railway, and she wrote to Brunel and to the directors with ideas of many things, giving her support. In 1841, she wrote to them recommending planting willow and poplar trees on the embankments to stabilize them. And she continued to offer technical advice despite the fact that, as she wrote, it is unpleasant to speak of oneself. It may seem boastful, particularly in a woman. Well, maybe the trees were created to her orders, willow and poplar, but over recent years there have been many more landslips, and the trees are now were mainly sycamore trees growing up over this century rather than last century. And in the late 1890s, there was a landslip of 100,000 tons, which derailed a London to Bristol express in this cutting, but luckily without loss of life. In 2001, there was another landslip, and in 2002 to 3, there was a major slope stabilization engineering project undertaken by Network Rail. They used concrete caissons, grouted face nails, wire rope, anchors, thrust plates, and rock net curtains thick as your finger to secure the sides of this cutting against landslips. 21st century technology has been used to keep the 19th century railway working to full capacity. In 1949, Great Western Railway became the western region of British Rail, and it's still the West Country's main railway line. It parallels the River Avon, and to maintain low gradient it runs over the floodplain on an embankment and in cuttings like this through the valley sides. This is a great photograph, isn't it? By John Godfrey, and John Godfrey has a great good fortune to live in Brunel's Tunnel House here, where the train has just come underneath. And this, just behind the railway signal, is the eastern entrance to the railway tunnel. And here's the railway bridge that we've found our way to. We walk behind the house here and along the top of the shallows and back down into the shallows car park. But where we were looking, where the signal was also the railway station. We would have walked underneath here and back up to the on the Bath Road. And the railway station, in its pomp in the early 20th century, was axed by Dr. Beeching in 1969. But some of the local people, such as Chris Warren, chair of the Saltford Parish Council in 2010 and still is, argued for a new station because all the superstructure of the station had been taken away after 1969. But with the electrification of this main line, there were time slots that could have had new trains stopping at Saltford Station. Well, the parish council put a survey out to the people of Saltford, who all voted for it. Well, the vast majority thought it was a good idea. So did the local politicians of Bath and North East Somerset. But when it went to the national government, there was a change of government, and the new lot, in their wisdom, said the money wasn't there, and so the station wasn't built. We come back down this little path here, across Dave Curnock's field, and up onto the Midland Railway station. And this is what it would have looked like in the early 20th century. Steam locos going down here, no woodland along the track. Worth having a look at how that's changed. Because here's a present day photograph taken in 2018, and there's a cycle track. Look at the trees that have grown up. If you leave land long in this part of the world, trees will grow up, largely sycamore to start with. Then the oak and beech will shoulder their way through, and the elm and ash. And this is what it looks like now. Here's my the seventh, my particular hero, because I've met the chap. I was riding my bike along a muddy track in 1981 when I came to live in Saltford. I was riding my bike to the school I taught at, Sir Bernard Lovell School in Oldland Common. And I met this chap shoveling tarmac off the back of a flatbed lorry. So being a bit nosy, I said to him, "What are you doing?" And out came the vision of Sustrans with thousands of miles of cycle track where there are these old, then disused railway lines all over the country. And my goodness, he's brought it all to fruition. John Grimshaw, our seventh innovator. Along the cycle track, the story of the path is told a little bit like the towpath track, but this is the cycle track version. And stories all the way along the track and are shown in panels like these. And here we are back at the Bird in Hand. and we walked down again to the Shallows car park, and that's the end of our story. So, to summarise, in this talk, we've paid tribute to those 7 internationally recognised transport innovators: John Hore, John Padmore, John Loudon McAdam, Isambard Kingdom Brunel, William Eckersley, John Bayliss, and finally John Grimshaw, who saw the national potential for cyclotracks and started here. We've learned how the cities of Bristol and Bath have been linked in many changing ways, and how sleepy old Saltford has featured in some of the nation's key moments of routeway creation. I hope you've enjoyed the walk.